Paul wrote several letters to the new Christian churches while in prison. One letter was to the community of Philippi, and here is part of his conclusion. Philippians 4, verses 1 to 9. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm, rooted in the love of God. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to work together in agreement. Yes, I also ask that you, my loyal companions, help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in your God always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. God is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you.
So, 1 year ago, this weekend, this Sunday, was the very first time in my memory that we canceled church. I had no power in my house. Most people didn't. I remember in my house it was down to 11 degrees or so I was wearing a lot of layers. And my street was still very full of snow. So on Sunday morning, I walked up to Saskatchewan Avenue and had someone I knew with a truck pick me up and drop me off here at the church, just in case anybody tried to show up in the middle of our shutdown. No one did. And so as I sat alone in this building for a little while, I wondered, how does one celebrate Thanksgiving in such a bizarre world? And then 2020. Thanksgiving is not back to normal. Thankfully, the power was restored despite my little microphone issue. We have electricity. There is no snow. But I don't know about you, but the people I have encountered this particular week are grumpy. They are cranky, they are crabby, they are all of the dwarf names that were not picked because they were not happy enough. Many are exhausted. You'd think it wouldn't be so with all of the things that we used to do that we can't do. But still, somehow, people are tired. Tired of having to think about everything they do. Tired of having to learn new things. Tired of being careful and taking precautions. Tired of all the new work this bizarre world requires. Tired of staying away from people. Tired of worrying about judgment. And tired of unconsciously or consciously judging other people for their behavior. Tired of the raised stress levels all around us. And tired of things that aren't even COVID related, but are just so much harder in this world. So tired of having too much work and not enough time to do it. Tired of being sick, other kinds of sick. Tired of being sore. Tired of worrying about loved ones who are sick or sore. Tired of being tired. And we know that it's not going to get easier real quick. Because we know that winter is coming. We can feel it. We notice the shorter days. We feel it in the night air. We know that less outdoor time is coming to us, and we don't like that idea at all. And once again, Thanksgiving can't be the food and party event that we want it to be. With numbers rising in this country, in this region, we're being asked to limit our family gatherings, to stay small, to stick with our little bubbles, and that's hard. When Paul wrote to the Philippians, he understood something of this kind of feeling. No, it wasn't 2020, but he had his own troubles. As he was writing that letter, he was confined to a Roman prison cell under the sentence of death because of his faith. And he knew that his friends in Philippi would soon face, or were likely already facing, persecutions and rejections specifically because of their faith. And there's some disagreements about why he comments right off the top about the leaders working in unity. Were Euodia and Syntyche fighting? It's possible. Conflict is part of every community and even more prevalent when people are stressed, right? So maybe he is trying to soothe a particular disagreement when he says that they should work together. Or maybe he is just trying to encourage them, like saying something like, I know what you're doing right now is hard, and it's getting harder, and it's going to be easy to turn on each other, to bicker and to complain and to judge one another. But don't forget, you're part of the same family. You're part of the same team. You're working towards a common goal. And we do know, for example, that there was a bit of division among early Christians. On the one hand, there were those who took very seriously Jesus' call to get rid of their stuff and follow him and live the way he did. So they were the ones like Paul, who moved from place to place and relied on the kindness of those they met for shelter and for meals and for support. And then there were those who had work and families and homes, who joined the movement but didn't give up the rest of their lives. And when facing judgment from the outside and persecutions and trouble, then they often started to turn on one another, judge one another. And those who didn't give up all their possessions were accused of taking the easy path and conforming to the world rather than following Jesus. And the others might be accused of freeloading or pushing their religious practices on everyone else. So it is no wonder then that Paul invites them to stand firm, to ground themselves in what they believe and what they know in their faith, so that it could be kind of like gravity for them, to hold them to their values, even if they chose to exercise their values or live out their faith in different ways. So no wonder he tells them to support one another, because they're in it together. Seems to me that's a message we could also use these days, to ground ourselves in our values, to remember what matters, to be gentle with one another, to support each other, even when we seem to be coming from different places or different experiences. Then Paul, from his prison cell, returns to reminding them of habits of the heart he'd love for them to cultivate. Not in spite of their circumstances, but to help them deal with their circumstances. Don't worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. He doesn't say this to suggest that there's nothing to worry about. Indeed, we know there was plenty. But what he is suggesting is that prayer and thanksgiving is a really great way to deal with your anxiety, so that instead of worry, as he says, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. Turns out Paul actually really knew what he was talking about. There's now all kinds of science about the power of gratitude to reduce anxiety. Robert Emmons is among the world's leading scientific experts on gratitude. He's a professor of psychology at the University of California. And his research clearly shows that people who practice gratitude consistently report a whole host of benefits, from physical things like stronger immune systems, better sleep, lower blood pressure, to the psychological, like feeling more alive, alert, awake, optimistic, to the social, like being more compassionate, more generous, more forgiving, feeling less lonely and isolated. There's another study out of Eastern Washington University that found that people who wrote for 20 minutes about the positive consequences of an unresolved, unpleasant memory felt more closure, less unpleasant emotion, and fewer intrusive memories than people who wrote about their memory in general. Looking at upsetting experiences through the lens of gratitude helps us find more meaning in them, including how we've grown and how we've learned. And yet, despite all of these empirical benefits, I think there is still often a gratitude gap in our lives. We think gratitude's important, we believe gratitude's important, and yet I don't know if we express our gratitude all that often. I wonder if it's partly because it runs counter to our ideas of independence and self-sufficiency. Many of us have grown up believing that we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We are responsible for our own well-being. We need to help ourselves. I am personally well entrenched in this. I'm a great advocate of people taking responsibility. I do not like the feeling of vulnerability that comes with relying on other people. But being thankful asks me to remember all of those things I don't have control over. And because I'd rather not do that, I also stop being as grateful as I might otherwise be. But the truth is, none of us are self-made. In the foreword to the book Tools of Titans, Arnold Schwarzenegger writes this: "I am not a self-made man. Every time I give a speech at a business conference or speak to college students, do a Reddit AMA, someone says it. Governor, Governator, Arnold, Arnie, Schwartzy, Schnitzel, depending on where I am. As a self-made man, what is your blueprint for success?" And they're always shocked when I thank them for the compliment and say, I am not a self-made man. I got a lot of help. Isn't that refreshing? No matter how successful we may be or may not be, we all get a lot of help, all of the time. There is so much that we don't control. And if we're having trouble feeling grateful, it might be that we need to remember that. I think that's part of what Paul's getting at when he invites his friends to offer their worries to God with thanksgiving. And then Paul goes on to say, finally, my beloved friends, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. For there is something about where we put our attention, isn't there? I remember a friend telling me just recently about how she'd been with another friend of ours, had been grumbling and complaining about her arthritis and her various aches and pains that have been plaguing her, until our friend stopped and said, well, what doesn't hurt? It wasn't sarcastic, an actual question. And my friend sort of laughed, and then started listing the things that didn't actually hurt. My elbow's not bad. My heart's pretty good. And when she started listing those, they both felt better. It may or may not come naturally to you, but for all of us, it is good practice, particularly on Thanksgiving in 2020. If we try, I expect we can find some good in 2020 after all. After all, this year I'm not by myself in a cold, dark church, am I? Thanks be to God. Amen.